we've put huge effort into something like Heat Smart and been on the front foot and proactive on that, and I'd like to see us be more proactive about the solutions which may not have would not have avoided the drought, obviously, but certainly could have mitigated. And I don't really accept that it takes 5 years to put these groups together and get these things happening. So I think we should speed things up a bit. And as I say, the other thing that concerns me a bit is we're still talking about 35-year droughts. I mean, again, it goes back to my comments on global warming. Surely we must recognise that these things are going to happen more frequently, and we need to move really fast to manage our responses much better.
Chairman, let me say at the outset, this is a very thorough paper, and I appreciate it being presented to us. It explains fully what we've been through. This has been a very trying season for anyone that was producing from the land in Hawke's Bay and beyond, including irrigators and non-irrigators. I believe that Council's acted completely properly in trying to deal with this situation as we've gone along. The fact is we had an historic drought and like all droughts we just haven't had enough moisture. I can understand the anger of those that whose livelihood depends on irrigated production, but unfortunately we get a drought like this and the water runs out. There are other claimants to the water and they've got to be recognised, and that's what minimum flows are all about. I'll read this paper with considerable satisfaction because it was prompted by the submissions to the annual plan, which I claim responsibility for. There were four. One was by me and the other was as a private citizen, and the other three were from a orchardist couple in the Lower Tuki that were subject to a ban at a critical time, and the ban in accordance with the consent conditions, and they acknowledged that, and a representative of the Twyford group, and to get some vertical integration involved in our discussion, someone from Heinz Watties. And their submissions made it clear that they were not looking for more water, they were looking for flexibility. And this is what we've got to work through for the next drought. We couldn't do anything about that drought. These discussions were taking place in March and April. So I reject completely that as a councillor I wasn't working for the interests of those that needed more water. But again, I say that I was looking forward to future droughts and see if we can fix this problem. So beyond that, we've got to look in the long term, as has been mentioned, but this is some time off, that the only way we can avoid a situation like this really reoccurring is to store water before we go into the next drought.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too welcome this report, and I compliment particularly Mr. Maxwell, who spent a lot of time and a lot of effort in bringing it forward for us. I might say at the outset that it's been a difficult time, and I acknowledge the difficulties that the irrigators had, not only in Twyford but across Hawke's Bay, because indeed this drought had a regional effect, and it certainly was severe in Twyford, and I acknowledge that. And I also want to tell you, Mr. Chairman, that I did accept an invitation from Mr. Crasbourne, and I spent a couple of hours with him on his orchards, and I looked at the trees and I looked at the conditions they were under, and it was extremely difficult. Those trees were definitely stressed, there was no question about it. What the death rate would result from that stressing, I'm unsure of, but certainly his pear trees in particular were taking an awful hiding, and I understand how they felt and the difficulty from it. There's been a lot of harsh comments made, and probably as the period of time goes on, a lot of, myself included, perhaps will think perhaps we could have handled this in a better way, where we haven't had quite the angst and quite some of the emotional context around it, because indeed we have to find a solution, and that's what we're working for. But I want to tell you, Mr. Chairman, that I did bring to the management, I had two meetings with Mr. Maxwell, and I had one with the CEO, Mr. Newman, about this problem, and we tried hard to see if there was any way we could get around the water bans. But as I was told, and I agreed with them, a ban is a ban is a ban. And if we had allowed that ban to be compromised at that point of time, the precedent across the whole region would have been quite dramatic. And so that is where we're at. But I am certain and sure that the future lays in water storage, and I welcome the work that we'll be carrying on in the Narrowrora catchment, and I believe that that will be the ultimate solution that we need to make sure that we these drought conditions are mitigated to the very best way they can be going forward. So I welcome I certainly support the 8 points that are in front of us to be part of this resolution. And again, in a couple of weeks' time, none of us really know what we'll be doing. But I can say that if I am back here in a couple of weeks' time, and that's not certain, but if I am, I certainly am happy to put what has gone behind us, and some of the words that have been said, I'm happy to let them go into the past, and that's where they should be. And I will do my utmost to work to resolve this problem that we have to the very best I can, not only for this council but to the residents of the community.
Mr. Moorhead.
Yeah, I'd just like to voice my admiration for the paper. I think it's very, very clear, and also just like to comment on the various hapu that contested the original submissions, and yet they were sort of prepared to jump on tractors last week and say we should have done something completely different. So it's a little bit of a hypocrisy. However, once again, it's an excellent paper. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to echo Mr. Moorhead's comments regarding Mr. Maxwell's engagement on this issue now, which is good. I think we should always, try and go for early engagement wherever possible, and perhaps earlier than this. I'm not going to say very much about the sustainable augmentation of the RWSS because that's something that will be looked into and will be considered as a way of enhancing solutions. But I just do want to make a comment about us thinking that there is a magic bullet to solve these problems, and it happens to be a $230 million water storage dam, because I don't think that is the answer. In fact, if that had been operational now, that wouldn't have saved a lot of the people who have been suffering, and it certainly wouldn't help high country sheep stations. It's just a small percentage, and it's a very expensive model. It's yet to be tested, comes with very high risk costs to it. So I think we need to bear in mind, Mr. Chair, that there's also other options such as on-farm storage, which I haven't seen really fully discussed around this table in my time. We need to look at ways of retaining water in the soil and developing the soil structure. We need to look at developing farm wetlands, which I know we're already doing, but we need to do more of that, pond systems, etc., developing our biodiversity, truly community-led water schemes, and perhaps less intensification rather than more, so that we're not also risking a loss of biodiversity. Thank you.
Summer? Are you speaking against? So I'm going to draw this to a close, I'm sorry. Are you speaking against? Standing orders, whatever.
Mr. Chairman, I do just want to cover a number of points. One is these were extreme conditions, and that everybody in the area was affected by this drought. The suggestion has been made that fruit growers suffer more than sheep and beef because they can't shift their stock. There was nowhere to shift stock to this year. It was culled. Producing dairy cows were culled because there was no feed, there was no water, there was no feed. So this is a drought that actually hit everybody, and the bottom line actually had to be, and it always has to be, safeguarding the life supporting. That was the term I was trying to think of with quoting Section 5 of the RMA. It's not even enhancing, maintaining or anything else, it's actually safeguarding. And that is a bottom line that nobody can get away from. We look at the 1983 drought, there was no RMA there, and the life supporting capacity of the water was not safeguarded in any way at all. And we certainly do not want to go, that was a drought that wasn't nearly as severe as this, and yet the impact on the water system was really severe. So I do want to have a look at some of the other issues that was brought up around the global consents, and I do actually need to remind councillors that it was Mr Liu himself who pointed out that without a plan change to allow the uncoupling of the taking and use of water, global consents are actually not possible. So it is something that is actually now being looked at through that plan change, and the only global consent at the moment is a voluntary one, or as we have an example of a global consent through an infrastructure use such as the Ruataniwha Dam. One of the things that we did come up through the annual plan was the urgency of looking at water storage for the Nararoa, and obviously our attention has been going into one, and the Nararoa has been only at a pre-feasibility stage, and this drought highlights that urgency. Has been raised that we should do small or on-farm. Please tell me in the Twyford area where the on-farm storage was going to occur. If anyone can come up with a good solution as to where that water was going to be stored on each of those properties, I'd be welcome a solution that could tell me how that would work. It seems to me storage up the catchment is the only long-term answer for that. But there's been a lot of grief this summer. There's been a lot of loss of crops, both annual and perennial crops. And unfortunately, even a plan change that allows protecting root crops does not actually save that particular aspect. But there's also a good news story in here, and I really want to actually highlight the staff have actually put together a very good report. But the good news story is the Raupari only went on ban for 1 day. That is fantastic, and that just shows, what working cooperatively and working. We've heard, did the staff engage early? Quite clearly they did, and quite clearly the work through this to achieve that has to be shouted out as a good news story. I look forward to actually seeing what the actual crops were at the end of this take. It'll be interesting when we get the final export figures, but certainly anecdotally I've heard that some of the Twyford crops were amongst the best of any of the blocks right throughout the region. So there has to be, amongst all the grief of the ones that did suffer, there's a lot of success stories in there from this summer too, and that's something that's worth celebrating. So, Mr Chairman, I do commend this report. I'm certainly not going to speak against it, but I did want to have a chance to have a say.
I get a chance to sum up, Mr Chair, and if I can take the Council's a little bit of licence because it wasn't mentioned in the debate, but ought to have been, and that's the environmental effects that occur when you don't have water in rivers. Mr Chair, we cannot afford our rivers to run dry. That's a simple reality. It's simply not a possibility for a community to allow its rivers to run dry, and they nearly did. So my concern is not only have we got the economic imperatives to deal with and people's livelihoods, we've got an environmental outcome for the health and safety of our rivers and protection thereof to ensure and take any opportunity we can to, one, increase minimum flows or at least to provide flushing flows. And that's what a project of water storage can deliver for this region, not only economic benefits and insurance, but also the opportunity to protect delicate ecosystems that need water. So I can't emphasise enough. It's interesting to hear the wailing and gnashing of teeth, particularly like people like Russell Norman and co around water storage proposals and the opportunities they present. When people such as horticulturalists are in trouble, there's much empathy and sympathy for them from those quarters. But when you come to a solution, these guys are in a different planet altogether. The planet reality is something that escapes a group of people that when they look at the facts and look at the reality, they are somewhere out there in the ether, a long way from here. People's livelihoods are at stake, the environment's at stake. Get on and store some water and put it in the river when you need it. Mr. Chair, this drought should be salutary for anyone that sticks their hand up and says no to this council pursuing a positive water agenda which will protect this region's economy and environment for decades to come.
Thank you. Well, I'll put that motion then. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Unanimously carried, and I will allow everyone 30 minutes for lunch, please. 25, preferably. 22. Thank you.